this is Katie from Katie Loves Classic Books, and I'm here today with my October wrap-up. So, for October, I did decide to read, mostly books that were good for Halloween time and for this time of year. So most of the books I will show you today, are Halloween-ish, I guess, except for the first book because, it was kind of something I continued on from September. So I'll talk about that first and then get on to the Halloween reads. And that was American Indian Stories, Legends, and Other Writings by Zitkala-Sa. And she was a Native American writer, and all the writings in this book were published, between the end of the 19th century to the 1920s. And this was actually kind of perfect for October, which I didn't think about at first, because it was Indigenous Peoples Day here in the US. I forget what day it was exactly. Instead of Columbus Day, a lot of people are now celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, which I think is a wonderful idea. I don't know if that was going on before this year or not. I feel like this is the first year I heard of it, but maybe not. Anyway, so it was kind of perfect then, even though this wasn't spooky or Halloween-y, to read this in October. So there's 3 sections in here. The first one is the Native American legends, and then there's a a fictional short story section, and then there's a section with articles that are published in various magazines and journals, and even some speeches, so more of a nonfiction section. Zitkala-Sa was of Sioux descent, so the legends and the stories pretty much have to do with her own background in that particular tribe, but then some of the articles and whatnot touch on other tribes as well and the Native American experience in general. So, the legend section being the first one, I'll talk about that first. So I found that section interesting. I wouldn't say I loved it, but it was cool to be able to read some legends from the oral storytelling tradition in a written format. A lot of them centered around this character called Iktomi, who was a trickster, and he was kind of selfish and dishonest, and the stories were kind of a moral and cautionary nature. I found it similar to other folk tales and fairy tales from around the world, and how a lot of the times they have some sort of moral or cautionary meaning or purpose behind them. So they were kind of fun, kind of interesting. It's really cool and important that I think things like that are written down because of the oral storytelling tradition. I feel like we've probably lost so much of Native cultures and Native stories and stuff like that. I just feel like they would have been more interesting, hearing them told, around a campfire late at night with the stars overhead and all of that. I feel like they did lose something from just being on paper in a book. But yeah, it's cool that they're written down. So anyway, so it was interesting. Didn't love those, but found it fascinating. And then the second section was the American Indian Stories, and those were mostly fictional short stories. The first few kind of made up this semi-autobiographical account of Zitkala-Sa's life, and I think that was my favorite section in this whole book. And those are really well done and well written. There were some really beautiful passages and just profound things, and I found myself writing down a lot of quotes from this book in general, but particularly from the story section. And so yeah, so the semi-autobiographical stories that started out that section were my favorite. They're very interesting. Kind of followed her life on the Sioux Reservation when she's young, and then some of her early schooling. They're fascinating and also sad, pretty much. The clash between the two cultures and, the assimilation that was going on and stuff like that. And the other stories in this section were interesting as well. Like I said, those are all pretty much like from her tribe. And then there was one, well, it was in the short story section, but I don't really feel like that much of a short story, but it was kind of talking about her spiritual beliefs, and I found that story or essay perhaps rather interesting. And then the last section were the journal articles, magazine articles, and speeches. Some of them were really interesting, and I'm very glad that they were included because I feel like I learned some things that I didn't know previously, but then some of them were a bit too repetitive and dry, and I feel like it didn't add to this collection, and maybe it would have been best if they didn't include those so that what was included was just more interesting, I guess. But yeah, I feel like I learned a lot I didn't know. A lot of them just discussed the clash between the two cultures and just the difficulty the Native Americans faced. Like, they were being forced to assimilate and parts of their culture were being banned. Like, I think tribal dances or something were banned, which is just like, why? And so that's really difficult and just terrible, of the U.S. to try to strip this culture of their culture, pretty much. But then they made it so hard for them to assimilate. Like, it wasn't quite that easy for them to go to school, or schooling wasn't that widely available, or like some of the articles kind of made it seem like that. So they were like forcing them to assimilate, but then they're making it difficult for them to assimilate and actually do well in our culture. And like, they weren't granted citizenship till the 20s. Like, what? So we came here and stripped these people of their lands and then didn't give them citizenship to this new country we decided was ours till the 20s. Like, what on earth? Anyways, these are the things I didn't learn in school, and are just probably important for me to realize now, and others as well. Yeah, and they fought. I didn't realize Native Americans fought in World War I. It's kind of interesting, but that was like before they were granted citizenship, so that's rather problematic. Anyway, so just some interesting things I didn't know about previously, and I mean, I knew some rough things went on, and that, it's just totally not fair and just sad, really, that we came in and took over this culture and just pushed them away, because this is really the, the heritage of this land. And they had such an interesting culture and cultures, I guess, and yeah. And so I think it's just important to read things like this and to not forget some of the things that have happened, and to realize maybe the extent of what did happen, and to, cherish these cultures of these different tribes. And yeah, so that's that. So anyways, I'm really glad I read this. It was very interesting. Like I said, not everything was like super enjoyable the whole way through, but I'm really glad I read it, and there were some good things in here. She actually is quite a wonderful writer, and like I said, I learned various things that I didn't know previously. The legends and the Indian stories have been published separately before, so if you're interested in one or the other, you can pick them up separately if you don't want to read this whole thing. Out of all the sections, I recommend the American Indian stories the most, and so that was published separately. So if you just want some short stories from a Native American perspective, perhaps that might appeal to you. But this was pretty cool, just in the fact that it contained so much. Oh, yeah. And I forgot, always give ratings on here for what I rated them on Goodreads, if it matters, but I kind of feel like maybe it shows how much I liked it. No, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on there. So yeah, that was that, and now we can get to the spooky Halloween books. So, the second book I read in October was Carrie by Stephen King. So this was my first Halloween pick. You know, Stephen King is pretty standard, and just, I don't know, I can't think of a bigger or more popular horror writer in general. So I thought it would be good to pick up one of his books, and I went for his first book, which is Carrie, and I believe it was published in 1974 originally, and I also gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So, Carrie follows a teenage girl named Carrie with telekinetic powers, and she has rather a rough life. She's very brutally bullied at school, and her mother is basically a religious fanatic, and so she deals with a lot of hardship at home as well. And something pretty bad happens, but then things seem like they might turn around when a popular boy named Tommy Ross asks Carrie to the prom as a way of atoning for an event that happened. And so things look like they might look up for Carrie until something terrible happens. And yeah, I won't say more than that. So there was a really interesting introduction in this by Stephen King that I'm really glad I read, because it kind of talked about the origins of where he came up with Carrie. And he said it started when he saw a magazine article about this family that thought they were haunted and had gone through some paranormal things, and then they brought in some paranormal investigator or something, and it was thought that it probably wasn't actually supernatural in nature, or it wasn't ghosts. It was probably the teenage daughter and her emotional state that was causing the events to happen. So he thought that was interesting, and so he thought of female girls and how their emotions can, once they reach puberty, affect things around them, and that's sort of where he came up with Carrie's telekinetic powers. And then as far as Carrie and kind of her character and her different issues, like the bullying and her mother and stuff, he kind of used and got inspiration from these 2 girls from his childhood that kind of were each in similar situations, and together they would be Carrie. So I thought that was rather interesting. Yeah, so I found this to be rather fast-paced, or it was just a good pace. I was interested all the way through. It was written in an interesting way. It wasn't just from different characters' perspectives. It was there were magazine articles and book articles about some of the things that happened, but from that were written after the fact, and I thought that was interesting. I thought that rather added to the story. And yeah, I mean, I felt really bad for Carrie, first of all. And I thought this was an interesting exploration of a few things. I mean, this book definitely speaks against bullying, and I think most people, when they think of this book, would think that way. It just shows what you can do to a person, when you bully them, and just how cruel that is. And on a weird side note, it also kind of shows religious fanaticism and how that's not so great either, just the extremes. And I guess just what bullying by one's peers and then just such hardship at home can do to a person. and what it does to a person's emotional state. And then Carrie's case, because she has powers, what happens then when you drive a person to that extreme? I feel like this, I don't know if Stephen King meant it that way, but I couldn't help but think about these things. I feel like this book spoke very strongly about how people feel about women's sexuality and menstruation, but that's tied into a woman being sexually mature. So, yeah, because there's a lot about that. Like Carrie's classmates and their other girls, they freak out when she has her first period, and something about it makes them angry and just act out in a ridiculous way. They're not okay with their own sexuality, perhaps, or the fact that they like menstruate. Like, they're not okay with it. They're unsettled about it. And then Carrie's mother, makes Carrie feel guilty and dirty because she's a woman now. And she goes off on like a whole thing because of that. And I mean, that kind of reflects some religious beliefs in general. I mean, Carrie's mother is extreme. Yeah, and just kind of shows like this underlying like societal and religious and all these, just this unsettling, I don't know, they're just like, they're unsettled and uncomfortable with women's sexuality and probably like reproduction and menstruation, all this stuff. And it just, I don't know if Stephen King meant it that way, but it just kind of came out that way. And all the stuff Carrie goes through and how they react to her, and then and yeah, I don't know how to word it other than that. But yeah, so just an interesting exploration of a lot of things, really. And I guess I didn't expect that from this, but it was cool. I mean, I knew the story of Carrie before, so it wasn't super surprising, but I enjoyed reading it. I feel like with Stephen King, like, I think that he's so popular that I like don't realize or don't think that I'm going to get like a lot of depth out of his books, but this is the third book of his I've read now, and I feel like I've gotten a lot of interesting stuff from his books. Like, there's a lot of depth to them. I've only read like his earlier work, so this is the third one I've read, and I've also read The Shining and It. So I don't know if his later stuff is like that, but I feel his early stuff, it's good, and there's more depth than you would expect from horror novels. Yeah, so I do still want to read more Stephen King, and more of his early stuff, mostly. It's still my favorite, but this was really good, and I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, and yeah, just a lot of interesting stuff. Yeah, so I recommend this if you haven't read it by any chance. Okay, the third book I read this month and second Halloween book was Vertigo by the French writing duo Boileau-Narcejac. I don't know if that's necessarily how you say it, but that's me giving it my best shot. So, this is published in 1954, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So, this is the book that inspired the Hitchcock film of the same name. So that's why I thought might be good for Halloween, because Hitchcock kind of, I'm a big like Hitchcock film fan, and Hitchcock films remind me of this time of year. So I thought it would be a good time to read a book that Vertigo is based on. And this was pretty different from the movie. And plus, I didn't remember a lot of the plot twists in the movie, so I was surprised. So, this follows a French ex-policeman named Flavier, and one day his friend calls him up and asks him for a favor. He says his wife is acting rather strange and he wants him to follow her and kind of figure out what her deal is. She's been acting really strangely, and she's been obsessed with a dead relative of hers. And so Flavier starts to follow her. He's intrigued by the mystery, but he also becomes rather obsessed with her. I don't think that's too much of a spoiler. And then it goes from there. So this book is split into two sections. The first one is kind of Flavier following, the woman's name is Madeline, following Madeline and kind of seeing what her deal is and becoming obsessed with her. And then there's like a big climax, and then that section's over. And the second section is like after the climax, a few years have gone by, and Flavier probably still isn't over what has happened. And I don't know, I can't really talk about that section too much without spoiling it. Well, certain things happen, and it's like those events really haven't been put to rest, and he hasn't really figured out what the deal was yet. And he's also just very obsessed with Madeline still. And then it goes from there, and it wraps up, and you see what the deal is. So, the first section was my favorite. It was slower, but not like slow. It was interesting. I enjoyed getting like introduced to the story and the characters and the mystery and what was going on. And I just found that section enjoyable. And I found Flavier an interesting character, I guess, because I guess I'm so used to like the typical like English detectives like Sherlock Holmes and even Poirot, even though he's not English, he's written by an English author. And they're very like, maybe more like detached. They like don't seem too like emotionally involved in their cases. And so even if other people in the mysteries are rather like emotionally involved, maybe there's crimes of passion or something like that, the detectives are rather detached and methodical and see things from a very practical standpoint. But Flavier, although this isn't necessarily a typical mystery, I don't know what the difference is between mystery and crime, but I know that there is one, and I think this would be more crime, whereas like Agatha Christie and Sherlock Holmes are more mystery. Anyways, if you know the difference, let me know and explain. So Flavier, though, was so like passionate and then kind of crazy, and I don't know, that's just not what I expected from an ex-policeman and detective of this story. So that was kind of fascinating. So I don't really know if I liked him necessarily, especially towards the end, but I found him just so fascinating for the fact that he was so passionate and all that. Yeah, and then the second section, I don't know, it was more gripping, but I didn't love it as much as the first section. I think I would have liked the book more if it continued in the same tone, although then maybe it just wouldn't be a good book. I don't know. So the second section was so gripping, but it got more like hallucinatory and like weird, and like Flavier got more obsessed, and it was just like, you felt like you were going a little mad reading it, and I just thought that there wasn't going to be a straightforward answer, and it was just going to be really bizarre and like just end in this crazy whirlwind. But I'm happy to say that you do get an explanation at the end. And I really wanted an explanation because it just would have been weird being left in the place it was kind of at before the explanation. So, anyways, yeah, so this was an interesting book. Different from the movie for sure, but having seen the movie didn't really spoil this, but I also didn't remember the movie that well. And they're just very different. Like Alfred Hitchcock's at the movie in like California and San Francisco, and this is set in France. At first, mostly like around Paris. This was also interesting. The first half was like during World War II, and then the second half was either to like just after, or like really towards the end. Yeah, and there was just some interesting exploration in this book, like the fear of death that Flavier seems to have, and I feel like the backdrop of the war kind of adds to that, or like why he would have a particular fear of death. Like it just goes with the times and just everything that's going on, that kind of, that anxiety of death and all of that. And also just about obsession and how that's not good, and just how that differs from real love. Yeah, I don't know. So, a very interesting crime novel. I think it's crime. And I enjoyed it. So yeah, so I do recommend this if this sounds like something you're interested in. I think it's really cool. I didn't know until I picked up this book, but it's published in this series called Pushkin Vertigo, and it's like a series of books, like all crime novels from the 20th century, but they're all translated works. So like crime novels from the 20th century that you probably, haven't heard of before because they're not from English-speaking countries. So I think that's really interesting, and I think I might check more of them out eventually. Put some on my epic to read list. Yeah, this was cool. The fourth book I finished this month was The Haunted House by Charles Dickens, and this was published in 1859, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, I think. I may have given it 3. I don't remember now. I think it was 4. Something like that. I think it was 4. We'll say it was 4. So this was not just written by Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens ran a few different magazines, I believe they were, like journals. And every Christmas he would have like a special edition and do something cool. And so the year that he did this, 1859, he wanted himself and a few other Victorian authors to write short stories that kind of all linked up and had to do with this haunted house. So that's pretty much what it is. It's like a short story collection, but they're all pretty linked, and they all have to do with this haunted house. So Charles Dickens compiled this collection. He contributed to it, but there were also other Victorian authors, which I'm going to tell you who those were. I mean, there was Wilkie Collins and Elizabeth Gaskell. Those are the big names that I'm sure most of you have heard of. There are also some ones I had never heard of before. So, Hesba Stretton, George Augustus Sala, and Adelaide Ann Proctor. So the setup of this collection is that a man and his sister have rented this old house that's supposedly haunted, and they invite a few friends to stay with them, and they say that on the 12th night of Christmas they will all get together and share any ghostly encounters they may have had during their stay there. And so the first story that was the setup story was written by Charles Dickens. I think it was my favorite. It just had a nice atmosphere. I don't know, it was kind of like humorous and jolly in a way. And I enjoyed that. And then each of the writers have one story from one of the characters, and then Charles Dickens writes the closing story, which was just really short. And kind of a weird ending, but that's okay. So like I said, the setup story that was written by Charles Dickens was the best, and it was really good. But then the second best that I really enjoyed was written by, I think it was Hesba Stretton, and yeah, I just really liked that one. It had like a nice little romance at the center of it, and I don't really know what it reminded me of, but it reminded me of like a few other Victorian authors, and it was just really well done and enjoyable. And so it made me look up Hesba Stretton because I've never heard of her before. Apparently she mostly wrote like religious children's stories, But she also wrote a few adult novels, and one of them, I don't remember what it's called now, it sounded really good, so I might check her out just because I thought her writing and her story was really well done. I think the second one was by George Augustus Sala. His was rather humorous, and I enjoyed it. And then I think Wilkie Collins. His story was good and had like this real palpable sense of like stress and terror. I just don't think I enjoyed the story, but like it was well done, or at least the feelings it invoked were well done. And it reminded me of a story of Edgar Allan Poe's, gosh, what's it called? I think The Pit and the Pendulum. Pretty sure that's what it is. And I felt similarly about that. Like, it was really well done, and the sense of like terror and stress was really palpable, but I didn't enjoy it. So similar to that. And then the story that Charles Dickens did that was from one of the characters' perspective, it was really good. Just kind of weird, so it was good and weird. And Adelaide Ann Proctor wrote a poem. I didn't like that. Maybe it's just because maybe in a different circumstance it would have been okay, but it was just kind of odd in this selection of stories, though. I don't know. I feel like it just didn't fit very well with the rest of them. And then Elizabeth Gaskell wrote a story, and hers was really well done. It was just really long. Like, it was much longer than the rest of these stories. So, like, it was well done, but I didn't love it because it's just kind of excessively long. So yeah, but they were all interesting, like pretty good writing and all that. I think Charles Dickens wished that this collection was a little bit more cohesive. I think he was a little disappointed with it when it all came together, and I can see why he felt that way, because I guess I can see it that way too. But it was still good. It wasn't, I think the biggest surprise was that this wasn't really a real haunted house, or they weren't stories of a paranormal nature. Everyone was pretty much haunted by their like own imaginations or like their past or something like that. And like, that's cool, but it just wasn't as spooky as I thought it might be. So if you're listening to this and you want to read this because you think it's going to be spooky, just like be warned, it's not. It's more everyone being haunted by their imaginations and their past. And if that sounds okay, and you just want some little short stories by some Victorian authors, this could be fun. So yeah, so it was fun and it was cool, but not amazing. Yeah. So, and now I will be checking out Hesba Stretton that I didn't know about previously. Charles Dickens I really love. I haven't like really reviewed much of his stuff on here because a lot of his books I read when I was younger, and I've read quite a fair amount, and you know, he was one of my first literary loves, so I have like a big soft spot for Charles Dickens. Elizabeth Gaskell I really like. I've read 2 of her books and I'm very excited to read more. And Wilkie Collins, I read 1 book by, The Woman in White, and that was enjoyable, and I'm interested in more of his work. I don't know if I necessarily love him so far, but I find him interesting. So that's that. This month was Carmilla by the Irish author J. Sheridan Fanu, and this was first published in 1872. And I gave this 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I believe this was my favorite. Yeah, this was my favorite book of the month. It was short, but it was just really good and interesting. So this is pretty much a vampire novella that predates Dracula and perhaps influenced it a wee bit, except it follows a female vampire named Carmilla, and she goes to stay with this girl named Laura and her father in their castle that they have in the forest of Austria. And her and Laura strike up a close friendship, although it's pretty clear that Carmilla probably feels more. And then when Laura starts having these nightmares, things progress from there, and Carmilla may not be what she seems to be. So, this book wasn't like, as surprising or mysterious or scary, as maybe it was when it was first published. But that doesn't mean it wasn't interesting, because this was just so interesting, even though like I kind of knew what was going to happen. It was just so good. Yeah, so this is pretty much like a lesbian vampire story, and I mean, that's pretty clear. Like, I don't even think I'm guessing with that. Like, I think it's pretty obvious that's what's going on here. And yeah, Laura and Carmilla were just such interesting characters. Their relationship was fascinating. Just everything about it was fascinating. I did kind of like the setting. Like, it was kind of, I don't know, it was very atmospheric and very like fairy tale-esque. And yeah. And I just think vampire stories, and this one in particular, are just really interesting. Maybe more the ones that are published like in the Victorian era, but they're just interesting for the themes they possess, because I feel like they just show a lot of what's like being suppressed or repressed at the time. There's a lot about the fear of death, I think, within vampire stories, fear of death of the self and of loved ones, because people were dying from all sorts of weird things back in the day. But also the most obvious and the biggest theme, I feel, is the repression of sexuality, and in particular women's sexuality, and definitely in this book, women's sexuality. And also because I don't really know if that's what they're going for. Maybe it was just like kind of showing the repression of women's sexuality in general, but because of the fact that this was like a lesbian vampire story, maybe the suppression of like same-sex love as well, but I'm not sure. Yeah, and so Laura and Carmilla, for this fact, were pretty interesting characters, because Laura seems like pretty pure, like, the best kind of example of womanhood, and from those days, and like how they thought you should be and all that, and she's sweet and angelic and all that. And then Carmilla is lustful and passionate and more sexual and dark. So they kind of represent these two different female archetypes, Laura, the Victorian ideal, and Carmilla, what they're trying to repress. And I almost feel like it's interesting. I don't know if J. Sheridan, the fan, even meant it like that, but it's interesting to see Laura and Carmilla as counterparts to each other, like the same being, kind of. And Carmilla just represents like the lustful, sexual, passionate side, and Laura like the pure side. And and the patriarchy, all the men in the story want to kill and do away with the passionate, lustful side, and keep the pure and angelic side. So it's really interesting to read it like that as well. But like I said, I don't know if he meant it to be read quite that in depth. It kind of reminded me of Jane Eyre in that fact, because I know there's a lot of interesting theories about Jane Eyre that are kind of cool, about Jane and Bertha kind of being facets of the same person, and Jane is the pure innocent part, and Bertha's the wild, lustful, passionate self that needs to be locked in the attic because she's crazy, and how she has to be done away with for Jane to be happy. I don't know. That's like one way to read Jane Eyre. So this book it's enough about Jane Eyre, but this book reminded me of that in a similar way. Yeah, so it's just really good. It was just like a really quick book to get through, very fascinating. And yeah, I feel like, two books this month, this one and Carrie, I feel like deal with the suppression of female sexuality. Oh my. Although I guess that's kind of an important thing to explore, especially at this, I don't know, in this day and age and just these times. I have read Dracula before, but it's been quite a few years. So, like, I think I enjoyed this more, but I haven't read Dracula recently enough to really say that with certainty. But this was really good, and I just highly recommend it. Yeah, and I'm also interested in what else Sheridan LeFanu has written. I haven't heard what else he's written. I think I put something on my to-read list, but I want to read more of his work because this intrigued me. So, well, where are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 6th book I read in October was Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman, and this was published in 1995, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So I did the Stephen King, I did the book that was the basis for a Hitchcock film, and like a haunted house, vampires, and then I thought I would do witches, so that's what this book is about. Although this wasn't as Halloween-y as I thought it was going to be either, although it was enjoyable. So this book follows 2 sisters, Sally and Jillian. They're raised by their 2 aunts in Massachusetts, and their aunts are witches. And I think pretty much all the females in the family have some sort of witchy magic talent within them. And they try to run away from their witchy background and from their own selves, and they go on like various journeys. And so it's kind of about not running away from who you really are, and it's also about love. There's a lot about love in here, and just all its craziness and the things it makes people do, the mistakes you can make, but also like the hope there is to have a good relationship and to love again once you've lost love that you've had. So all good themes. I liked the first part when Sally and Jillian were kids because it felt more like witchy and magical, and I do feel like while there was magic woven throughout, and you would call this like magical realism, I suppose, it wasn't that heavy later on, and I think that's one thing I wished more from the book in general, was just more magic, and probably a stronger, the message of not running away from yourself being a little bit stronger, and then when it got all into like relationships and love and stuff, to really, like, I wish they had carried the theme of, like, it's really important, though, for you to, like, accept yourself a little bit further. So those are the 2 things I wished a little bit more from the book. But anyway, so the magic was cool, and, and then later on, we follow Sally's 2 daughters, Antonia, I think it's Antonia, and Kylie as well. So pretty much the women of this family, which was cool. And I found them all interesting in their own right. And I liked the exploration of love. The 3 guys that are portrayed as like good, loving relationships are all kind of similar and almost like interchangeable. They're like very down to earth and grounded and reliable, like good guys, but they're also like attractive. And that's like a good example of a guy you should want, and so I'm not complaining about that because that sounds nice, let's be honest. But they were like, they were too similar. It was like more the women characters that like stood out, I guess, but I guess that's what this was going for. Anyway, so this was a quick read. It was fun. It was kind of magical. Cool little message of love and all of that. And so it wasn't phenomenal. I almost thought I was going to give it 5 stars, but then just some of the things just like kind of weren't completely perfect for me. But this was still a really fun book. And it was witchy, just not Halloween-y. A lot of it took place in like springtime and summer. So I actually think that if you want to pick up this book, read it in those seasons instead. Even though like magic is still fun this time of year. It's a really popular movie that I didn't previously know about for some reason. And I watched it afterwards, and that was enjoyable too, in a different way. It was more magical, which I liked, but just different. So that was Practical Magic. The 7th book I read this month was A Halloween Party by Agatha Christie. And this was published in 1969, and I gave this 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So, I thought, at the end of the month, I felt like cozy mysteries, because I'm a cozy mystery fan, I suppose. I mean, I like a lot of things, but I do like cozy, like classic mysteries, and it reminds me of this time of year, and I thought, I'd been wanting to read more Agatha Christie anyways, and I thought Halloween Party sounded particularly perfect for Halloween. Although it wasn't that Halloween-y, so I don't know if I would recommend everyone pick this up for Halloween. So this is a Poirot mystery, and it starts out with this mystery author named Mrs. Oliver, and she's staying with a friend in this small English village that's kind of modern and ordinary, and she's helping set up this children's Halloween party. And when they're setting up for the party, this 13-year-old girl named Joyce boasts that she's seen a murder before. And then, after the party, it's discovered that Joyce herself has been murdered and drowned in an apple bobbing bucket. And that's not a surprise, because the back even says that. And so Mrs. Oliver calls up her old friend Poirot to help solve the case. So I'd say that, it wasn't split up in 3 sections, but there kind of just were 3 sections. The first was, the actual murder, the setting up of the story, following Mrs. Oliver. And the second half was, Poirot's perspective, and Poirot coming in and kind of methodically interviewing everybody who could know something or might be a suspect. And the third section is kind of the climax and then the, what do you call it? The explanation, I guess, of the mystery and the murder. So, yeah, so the first section, wasn't that interesting because it wasn't that Halloween-y like I expected. Halloween played no part later on. And it was kind of whatever, Mrs. Oliver was, kind of a cool character. She was almost Agatha Christie herself in a way, I guess, because she's a murder mystery writer. So she was kind of enjoyable. But that part wasn't that cool. And then Poirot comes in. I do like Poirot a good deal. I've read a few Poirots. And I like it when he comes in. And I do like his methodical approach of interviewing each person. But maybe it was just a bit too mundane in this one. Yeah, and I almost got the feeling that Agatha Christie was just getting tired of Poirot at this point, and maybe just writing in general at this point. Because I kind of got that feeling. The end was the most exciting. I started to guess who the suspect was towards the end a wee bit, but it was still pretty much a surprise. The ending was just weird. But weird is good. Yeah, so it's still surprising. I mean, Agatha Christie always surprises me. Maybe this is the most surprising, but still pretty surprising, weird, plot twist. And it really brings up these past murders and how that affects this present murder. And so the past is tied into the present and all of this. And that was pretty interesting. Yeah, other than that, a lot of the characters aren't that interesting except this little girl named Miranda, who's rather fairy-like, I found fascinating, and she ends up playing a big part. And then this man named Michael Garfield, I think, and he's a gardener, but an artist of sorts. He's created this beautiful sunken garden, and he takes this art very seriously, and he's Poirot calls him a very beautiful man. And both him and Miranda are just interesting, and then how they tie into everything was interesting. So they were kind of weird, interesting characters. So yeah, I enjoyed this, but my least favorite Agatha Christie so far. Like I said, it was still surprising, it was still enjoyable, but I just feel it was just different from the other mysteries of hers I've read, and I feel like she was just getting tired of it I guess you just get that feeling. Also, just really different, like, time period. Like, this is the 60s instead of, like, the 30s. And Agatha Christie is kind of, I feel like, judging the kids of that era, and just even the crime was different, like, everyone, because in Child is Killed, everyone's talking about sex crimes and how some creep, did something to her that's, like, kind of the gossip. And, like, I don't know that, but I feel like that's not something that really, like, cropped up in older mysteries. Maybe that was still, going on, or at least to some extent, but you can tell times have changed, and especially for children, and there's this whole thing about, not talking to strangers, and just all this stuff. I don't know. So I guess times were just changing, and the nature of crimes were changing. And so I don't know, so you can just see the changing times, I guess. Yeah, so this is not a place to start with Agatha Christie. If you happened to never read an Agatha Christie book before, try And Then There Were None or Murder on the Orient Express. Those are just, like, such standard classics of hers. They're just so good, and I always say are the best places to start. And I will be reading more Agatha Christie because I do enjoy her books, but I want to read more of her older ones for now. Like, this is still okay if you've read a lot of her books and you want to read this. You might get something out of it, but I wouldn't run to it, and don't expect this to be Halloween-y. So yeah, I think this was my 6th Agatha Christie, and like I said, my least favorite, and maybe the only one I didn't even give 5 out of 5 stars to. Like, I'd say all the other ones were like 5 out of 5 stars, and this was 3. So yeah, so it was okay. Okay, so my 8th and final book of October was Footsteps in the Dark by Georgette Hare, and this was published in 1932, and I also gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So I continued with the classic mystery theme. I just really felt like that at the end of the month. So I picked this up, and I have never read a Georgette Hare book before. So this follows 3 siblings, Celia, Margaret, and Peter, and also Celia's husband Charles and their Aunt Lillian, who all go to stay on holiday at this old priory that Celia, Margaret, and Peter have inherited. All the locals claim that the priory is haunted, particularly by this old monk. And when, like, creepy things start to happen, they wonder if the rumors are true, or whether these events could be caused by a real person, and things kind of escalate, and the mystery is solved. So, the mystery was surprising. Like, I kind of guessed it a wee bit towards the end, but, like, it's still surprising. I didn't, like, totally guess it. Maybe not the most shocking thing ever, but still, I got my mystery, But I feel like this is more enjoyable if read in, like, a lighter frame of mind, because it just has a lighter tone to it. There's kind of just, like, a little bit of, like, witty, comical, like, banter between the characters. And, yeah, but I thought it was enjoyable and fun, and I enjoyed the mystery. It was kind of atmospheric. There was a little bit of a romance in it with Margaret, which I enjoyed. It wasn't a huge part of the story, and maybe it wasn't, like, that well done, but, like, I enjoyed the inclusion of it. Yeah, and the characters were, like, okay. Like, I liked them. They weren't, like, super in-depth, but they were cool. Aunt Lillian was kind of funny, and Charles kind of seemed like he was in charge, and he was a good character. His wife Celia, though, I didn't really like that much, and she just wasn't really that fleshed out. Margaret was really interesting, more gutsy. She had the romance, so I liked that. And then she has a really close relationship with her brother Peter, and I liked their relationship. I think it's cool to see close sibling relationships. I feel like it doesn't happen that often in books, and Peter was cool too. And then just some of the townspeople are interesting. There's this artist that's really mysterious and weird. There's this man named Michael Strange, and he's rather strange and mysterious. And I liked the inclusion of him and kind of how his story and character turned out. I liked that. Yeah, there's something about this. I think the reason why I like this, because some people may not. I mean, I didn't love it, but like, I enjoyed it a good deal, and other people might not enjoy it as much as I did, but I feel like I did because there's something reminiscent of like the Nancy Drew stories I used to read growing up. I mean, it's not like a super close comparison, but there's something just Nancy Drewish about it, like in terms of the mystery and like the action towards the end and stuff. And so I found that cozy and nice. Yeah, Nancy Drew was like one of my first. I think a Nancy Drew book was like one of the first things I like read by myself. You know, that wasn't like a picture book or like some learning to read book. You know, and I devoured like the entire Nancy Drew series like a couple times. Like I remember like summers where all I would do would be to read Nancy Drew. So I don't know why I loved it so much, but just a lot of good memories. And so I just one of the first things I guess I was drawn to book-wise was mysteries. So I get just like a cozy feeling from like classic mysteries and stuff. So even the ones I haven't read before, I just get like a nostalgic vibe from them, and they're fun this time of year. So yes, this was anything phenomenal, but it was enjoyable and fun and cozy. I may check out another of Georgette Harris mysteries. She wrote a few. I don't know if she was like super well known for them. What she's really well known for, and what I'm really interested in picking up, are these like Regency historical fiction novels, and I think that sounds really cool. So I've heard good things about those. Yeah, so that's that. So those are all the books I read in October. I actually read quite a lot, but I think that's because none of them were that long, because sometimes I read longer books and then just don't read as much. But I got a lot of reading done for Halloween, which is fun. Nothing was that scary, to be honest. I didn't plan it like that. It wasn't like, oh, I can't read anything scary. But I'm not like disappointed to like, I don't know, it was more just going through like some sort of atmosphere that was perfect for Halloween. And I think I did that. Maybe next year I'll read stuff that's more scary. But it was a fun reading month, and October's not even over yet. I'm posting this early. I did start another book, but it's pretty long, and it's not Halloween themed, and I'm sure I'll finish it in November. But I just feel like I kind of got the reading done I wanted to for October, and it was enjoyable. So if you like this video, please leave a like or comment. If you've read any of these books or something you'd like to recommend me or something like that, feel free to comment. I'll post all the sites below, Tumblr and Goodreads, if you want to read my written reviews and see some other stuff. I'll post my Patreon below. I think I recently got a new patron. So if you're out there, thank you very much. The support is very much appreciated. Very kind gesture, so thank you. So if anyone else wants to support me there, feel free. If not, that's cool. And I shall see you next month with my November wrap-up. So have a wonderful month, everybody. Bye.